We have a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy Simon, who is a partner, QSA, and the PCI practice lead at Halock Security Labs. Jeremy?
Thanks very much, Brian. So this is Jeremy Simon here. Welcome, folks, and everyone to join us. We have a big crowd today, which leads into sort of a challenge that we have. We have a lot of ground to cover. We are going to cover a very broad range of topics related to PCI compliance. And I'm going to do my very best to cover this in a way that will bring some value to a broad range of audiences that I know we have on the line, including some executive level folks, more management level, line level tech guys, etc. I'm going to try to touch on some of the key aspects from all of those angles. So bear with me if it seems like I'm moving a little fast at times or if some of it seems a little less relevant. It all fits together. And so it's by necessity that I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground in the hour that we have together, because the risk otherwise is that you're left with some very misleading impressions, as unfortunately is often the case with PCI. You kind of have to have the big picture of how it all fits together, and that's what I'm going to try to give you here today. So diving right into it, and I'm not going to spend much time on this first screen, which is just an intro to who I am, but this is who's talking. I am a PCI QSA as well as a PA QSA, which relates to the Payment Application Data Security Standard, which we'll touch on briefly a little later. As well as some other security-related certifications that you probably recognize. Been in consulting for about 20 years, and about the last 12 or 13 of those years focused entirely on information security. And prior to that, focusing a lot on network engineering and systems engineering, which I mention only because I know some of you on the line have a similar background, and you will find that that lends itself very well to PCI compliance. It's a very compatible skill set. I'm also the PCI services practice lead here at Halock, staying involved in most of the engagements, certainly the larger ones. So I've been able to see a lot of sort of different environments, different verticals, different scenarios, what works, what doesn't work. I'm going to try to share some of the benefit of that experience with you here today. So a quick note about Halock Security Labs. We have been around quite a while. We were established in 1996. We have been entirely focused on information security professional services since 1999. There are not a lot of firms out there offering information security expertise as a core focus that have been doing so for over a decade. We have 6 primary focus areas covering PCI compliance as a major area of focus. We also have services around governance and strategy, such as building information security management systems, policy development, etc. We have technical assessment services along the lines of penetration testing and vulnerability assessment, in line with the requirements of PCI, among other things. We have security solutions and products supporting PCI requirements and other compliance needs. We have incident response and preparedness practice for anyone who happens to find themselves in the unlucky position of having been breached or wants to be prepared for that potential scenario. And lastly, we have an information security residency and placement division that focuses on security roles for full-time placement and contract positions. We have a heavy focus on PCI with more QSAs than any of the other QSA firms in the Chicago area. We have a large number of both QSAs and PA QSAs on staff full-time, as well as doing a lot of these engagements throughout the year. Last year we did over 75 of these PCI-related engagements. We also maintain a focus at the highest levels of the organization. Myself, as well as my 2 partners and all other director-level individuals in the organization are all QSAs and or PA QSAs. We operate by a sort of a mantra of purpose-driven security, which really boils down to making sure that whatever recommendations we're giving you align with what makes sense for your business, not just about checking a box for PCI or any other standard. We want to make sure that you're getting the most out of your investment, and so we want to make sure that the things we're doing for security also support other business needs and initiatives as well. So we're going to try to cover this in 3 general sections. Part 1 is going to be an overview of the DSS and an introduction to some of the key concepts you need to know and some of the common sort of misconceptions that hopefully we'll be able to avoid. Part 2 is getting into some of the recommended strategies as far as how to go about dealing with PCI compliance in a more cost-effective and expedient manner. And then Part 3 is going to be dealing with some of the more recent developments related to PCI. We are covering a lot of ground here. I'm going to do my best to get through all of this. There is a chance that we will run out of time on the last couple of slides, in which case I'd rather it run out as we're covering some of the recent developments, because there haven't been that many significant changes lately. I'd rather get through the first 2 sections, but I think we'll be able to do okay here. Moving into part one, intro to the PCI DSS. So what is the PCI DSS? At this point, we've come far enough that I suspect most of you know what it is, but as a brief review, it stands for the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. It's the result of a collaboration between all of the major card brands, including Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and JC Brands. It is intended to protect cardholder data wherever it resides throughout the payment lifecycle, and we'll talk more about how that manifests. Compliance is mandated. This is not optional. It is mandated for all organizations handling credit card data at any volume, and all deadlines for compliance have passed at this point, but we'll talk about some nuances of the evolving deadlines and penalties and things like that. This applies to all credit card business transacted over all payment channels. Doesn't matter how you're getting credit cards. If you're dealing with credit card payments, PCI applies to you. That's the bottom line. The first version of the standard was published back in 2004, and the most recent version went into effect in January 1st of this year. That is version 2.0. So this is only to illustrate that this has been around for a while. This is not a new standard. It's just rapidly evolving. Last but not least, it's important to understand that the DSS specifies the minimum set of requirements. A lot of organizations have made the mistake of approaching PCI using the DSS as their target as far as a benchmark. What you really should be doing is using the DSS as a minimum bar for compliance and make sure that you are going above and beyond that where appropriate to protect your business. The DSS is specifying the minimum that you need to do. So let me cover up front a couple of the common myths related to PCI and dispel those right up front. First of all, one vendor or product will make us compliant. Unfortunately, there are still some vendors out there who are either directly or indirectly suggesting that their solution or their offering is sort of a one-stop way of addressing all your PCI compliance needs. Just check here, sign here, whatever, and don't have to worry about PCI compliance. And I don't care what the solution is. I don't care who it is that's telling you that. It's wrong. And the reason I can say that is because of what we'll get into here in terms of how PCI works, who has responsibility for what, and the way enforcement works. Even if you can successfully shift the burden of compliance to third parties through some of the strategies we'll discuss, there is very likely going to remain some obligation on your side, and there is no one solution that is ever going to address all of these requirements. There's always going to be some aspect of this that needs to be driven through process, policy, and the way you conduct business on your end. So we'll talk more about that, but there is no one solution that will address PCI. Number two, outsourcing card processing makes us compliant. There is a great benefit to outsourcing various aspects of PCI compliance, and we'll talk about some of those later. But there is a mistaken impression by some that by outsourcing the handling of credit card data or processing or various aspects of credit card handling, that can eliminate the need to deal with PCI compliance, and that is not the case. It can reduce the scope of what you have to do. It can reduce the number of requirements that remain applicable, but it does not eliminate your obligations for PCI. Number three, PCI compliance is an IT project. That is also a myth. Number one, because it's not a project. It's a process that should not have a start and finish. This is an ongoing process that needs maintaining over time. And number two, it's not limited to IT. This is an organizational-wide effort that needs sponsorship and backing from the highest executive levels of the organization to be successful. This will require involvement from IT, HR, legal, et cetera. All areas of the organization will need to be involved at some level to be successful with this. Number four, this is a big one. A lot of organizations have the mistaken impression that by completing a self-assessment questionnaire, which some of you have already become familiar with, that means you're compliant. But if you can say yes to all the questions on that questionnaire, that means you're good. You've done what you need to do. And that is absolutely false. I will explain why. What you need to comply with, and this applies to everyone on this call if you deal with credit cards, what you need to comply with is the DSS, not the self-assessment questionnaire. The questionnaires are just a tool for the banks to help let them know that you're doing, hopefully, what's needed. It is not the full list of everything that you need to be doing. The DSS is that list. That is very commonly misunderstood, and unfortunately, that misunderstanding is somewhat being propagated by at least some of the acquiring banks out there. So we're working to correct that in the industry. Number five, we don't take enough credit cards to have to be PCI compliant. This one has been pretty well dispelled, but I still hear it from time to time. You know, we only have maybe a couple hundred credit card transactions a month, or even less, maybe only a handful of card transactions a month or a year. It does not matter. The ruling of the card brands and the PCI Council is that even a single credit card transaction puts you in the mix for PCI compliance. Now, the impact in terms of potential penalties or consequences of noncompliance or a breach very definitely would be different based on the volume of credit cards that are involved in the way that plays out if there was a breach. That's a different discussion. But in terms of who needs to be compliant, everyone dealing with credit cards at any volume level. So moving on, we have here the actual PCI DSS 12 requirements, and what you're seeing in the groupings, those green areas, is that the standard is divided into 6 primary requirement areas and then subdivided into 12 main requirements. This is a little bit misleading, and the only reason I want to show this here is because a lot of people only get to see it at this level, and they never really read through the details behind this. And if you kind of browse through, I won't read them all off here in the interest of time, but just browsing over the 12 requirements here, you can see that a lot of them look to be fairly common sense. A lot of you probably have these in place, at least in some form. And so you can get a sort of a false sense of security looking at this and getting the feeling like, we're not so far off. This shouldn't be a big deal. Until you dive into the details and you start to see what's really involved